when we're doing in my class, we do a topic on First Corinthians, and it says how Paul says, okay, rich and poor, I want you to, when you have the Eucharist, do it together, because they were having it separately in this church at that time. And he says his last line, which is, I think, the most radical line of the passage, after he rebukes the rich for having their private suppers on their own, and the poor were just eating outside in the atrium on their own with just very little food or getting hungry. Paul says, no, you have to eat together, the Eucharist together. And he says, eat together. And that at that time, with like a slave and a master, or someone who's rich political or whatnot, and someone who was a beggar on the street, to do that together culturally was just taboo, right? And I think my assumption was like, okay, let's just eat all together then. That's easy, right? And some friends that of too in other ministries, trying to do that, where Angie from Church of the Redeemer is saying, it's not so simple to just bring her outreach ministry and the church congregation say, okay, let's just do things together and everything is happy and merry, And so for me, that was like one of the assumptions that I thought, well, let's just do everything together. If everything is together, it should be all fine. Did you have any of those things where you found like you had an assumption in your mind about what it would be like, and then the reality of living together long periods of time together with different people in the house kind of shifted in your mind, if there was any?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things that have shifted over time too. Like, it's not just what I anticipated when I came into Romero House, it's what I felt like I've learned at Romero House, and then all of a sudden something throws that out of whack.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, one of our assumptions is like, everyone who lives in Romero House will like love being a part of community and like love all of the great things that we plan and want to be a part of them. And we had the experience this year at Christmas that for like the first time, we had a family who did not want to participate at all in Christmas for religious reasons.
Yeah.
And my experience in the past, so like we have, like a lovely, every house does a potluck breakfast and shares food together, and they like decorate a tree, and there's Christmas hamper gifts they open together. And then we have a big, this year it happened just within our houses, but usually we have a big, what we call the Evening of Peace party, that we try to be inclusive to other traditions. We don't call it our Christmas party, we call it our Evening of Peace on the 25th.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And usually in our experience, like most families are really keen on participating, regardless of what tradition they come from, because they see it as like, no one's trying to convert me. We're just having a lovely celebration. Our kids are getting presents. And it's a way of just like learning about a different tradition, even if it's not my own. And for this year, there was one family that was like just very, very like, nope, I don't want to participate in this because it's very much a Christian tradition. And that sort of like threw me off very much, because I sort of had in my mind that like in community, like everybody should just want to learn each other's different traditions, and parties are great. And if there's food involved and if there's presents involved, then everyone will want to be a part of it. Yeah. And so to realize that that's not the case for everybody, even though it has been for 8 years for me, like this year, it wasn't the case. Yeah. And I think that that's an important learning. And then we were sort of told by this resident, like, I know Romero House likes to celebrate all different traditions, but I would like to see more like intentionality in celebrating or recognizing different holidays from different religions. And that's like something that we try and do. We're not perfect at, but no one has ever sort of called us out on it before. I'm glad that they did. Like, I'm really glad that they did. But part of it, of what I'm learning is that, and I have learned, is that like in the context of community, everyone has different ideas of what it should look like. Yeah. And so to have a common vision, usually that vision has to be like a very basic vision. And that vision for us is like living together in a community of trust as good neighbors. But beyond that, like everyone's idea is different as to what that practically looks like, how we should be sharing food, what the relationship between a worker and a resident should be like, what the role of a house coordinator is, how much anyone should be expected to participate in community. Really, It varies so much. And so I think the other thing in community that I'm learning that's so exhausting
Mm.
is you can never sort of just settle on it and be like, this
Yeah,
is what happens at Romero House. Like
done.
this is what our vision is, this is what our programs look like, this is what your role is, this is what your role is. Especially as a transitional community of people who are coming through, like it's kind of an exhausting continual exercise of evaluating who we are and how we do things. Like that process is never done.
That is exhausting. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. I was like, I wanted to nail down my policy and procedure and say, this has been thought through. It's done.
Mhm.
Let's just put it away. And I've done my work with it. But that requires constant touch. Yeah, that is exhausting. And now what you said there about like that it has to be so basic, like, one thing I found and is that trying to find something at its lowest common denominator, do you find that it like dilutes the distinction of a community? Like, when it's always evolving and it's always changing. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot when it comes to even the ideas of church and ecclesiology. That's another thing. But like when it comes to this idea of going back to the basics of the main things, and then do you feel like, does Romero House have to have something very distinct about it? And does that distinction fade as a result of like going to the lowest common denominator and being able to kind of be like a chameleon and evolve as things go? And maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying too, but do you have a thought about that?
Yeah, if I understand the question that you're asking, I think that really what Romero House is called to be is flexible. So we have a
Mm,
sense of our way of being, which is a document that was written 30 years ago, has basically never changed in 30 years. Essentially our vision and our mission as a community. So I think there's like 9 or 10 points on it, and it's how we choose to live and see each other.
mhm. Can you give
And
us some examples of that? Because I remember seeing that and thought it was quite distinct. You don't have to say word for word, but what are some key themes from that? Just so people get a taste of it, because it's good to know what lasts 30 years.
yeah, what lasts 30 years, which is more, and we call it so our way of being. So
Way of
it's
being.
more of a way that we choose to relate to one another.
Hmm.
And so it has to do with, like, in some profound way, we are all brothers and sisters. So believing that that is true, choosing to live together as good neighbors is true, that we are choosing to trust each other, to greet each other with trust rather than suspicion.
Hmm.
It's that we choose to, and I don't think this is the language we use, but essentially have a lot of grace with each other and
Mm,
understand that we will not always react to situations or be at our best. And that's everyone who's within the community.
mm,
I think that there's something in there that says, yeah, we choose to live out the gospel with our lives rather than with our words in the
mm.
context that we're in. And there's a number of other sort of
Okay.
points, but essentially the flavor of it has to do more with how we relate to one another. Whereas the programs that we run, the
Mm,
policies that we have around guests, or how we transfer people between units, or if we keep waiting lists, or our worker handbook, which is like a 35-page document that talks about, you know, which meals we share together, and when we have community nights, and who's responsible for cleaning, and exactly what the companion relationship looks like between a family and a worker. That
yeah,
I rewrite that every single year.
that's annoying, but necessary.
But it's important. I mean, it's important
Yeah.
because our policies evolve, our context is evolving, the needs of refugees are evolving, our funding is
Hmm.
evolving, like ideas, new people come into the community, we learn new things, we take those learnings. Our society is shifting, like the needs of young people are shifting as our workers are like right
Hmm.
out of university, and they're a 22-year-old, and their view of work in the world is different now than it was when I did the program 10 years ago.
Hmm.
So we're constantly shifting and adapting and learning. So what that all looks like is different, but the spirit of our community remains the same. Like, we're committed to core values.